I now want to tell you the story I wrote for myself and for you all on growing self-love. So until recently, I couldn't grow my seed of self-love, and I hadn't planted it. And I hadn't planted my seed as I didn't feel like I had the compost in which I wanted to plant it. I was always searching for the ideal compost, the perfect compost that was really well balanced, with well-ordered layers of rich ingredients, alive and thriving and well-nourished, full of wholesome organic matter and well aerated with space to breathe, light, fluffy and pure, full of mutually beneficial relationships, all interweaving and interconnecting harmoniously together, accepting and valuing one another's unique qualities, settled and still. But my compost wasn't anything like this. It was full of self-loathing and suffering and grief and shame. It was dark and sticky and cloddy, smothering any goodness. There was no air or space in my compost but lumps of toxic matter that had been dumped there by other people. Rotting, stinky, shitty bits from childhood abuse and trauma, neglect and self-harming. Addictive behaviours and numbing my emotions with drugs. Full of silence and taboo and impotence, feeling disabled and hijacked by my emotions. Destructive relationships. There weren't any mutually beneficial relationships in my compost. There were just destructive relationships, all isolated from one another, not interconnecting at all. And there weren't balanced layers, but instead it was full of chaos, writhing and churning around. No seeds could sprout roots in my compost. So I tried really hard over the years to rid myself of all of those parts of me that I hated and I didn't want to associate myself, all of those chapters of my life that I no longer wanted to relate to or have with me. But I found the more that I tried to shed and the more that I tried to push away, the more they clung to me, like as if when you're walking through a clay field on a wet day with welly boots on, and the more you walk, the more the clay soil sticks to your boots and the heavier it becomes. It was getting tiring and wearing, and I was treading and walking, but it was getting heavier and heavier. And I didn't feel like I was living. I felt like I was just existing and sleepwalking through life. I didn't feel alive. I hated myself and I hated life. I couldn't understand life, really. I felt I was damaged goods, that I didn't want to be me. I was uncomfortable within my skin. I wanted to be somebody else. And life was painful. I'd been knocked over so many times and I was starting to spiral into despair, and I'd had to surrender to the suffering. But I was oscillating between numbing my pain and being hijacked by my emotions. But in doing so, in numbing my pain, so that helped me to a certain extent. It was like anaesthetizing myself to the pain, but at the same time I numbed myself to the joy, the potential joy that I could experience in life. So I was full of fear. I might just wait till this goes past. So even my resilience had started to weaken. I think the one thing that I could say that I've been grateful for is no matter how many times in the course of my life I've been knocked down and hit rock bottom, somehow something would happen where I'd always find something or someone or some way of seeking a moment that might help me in the resilience that I've had. So that's the one thing that I have been grateful for all the way through my life. But in this moment, a few years back, even that was starting to weaken. I didn't think I had it anymore. I felt like giving up, and I was cynical and skeptical about life, and I didn't dare to dream. I was full of fear, and I couldn't trust anymore or hope for any different. So I was completely hopeless by this stage. And I was really only staying alive for the sake of my two daughters. I did want to die, but I also knew that I couldn't because of them. So I was in this really trapped position. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to live, and I couldn't die. And so I knew that this was no role model for them as well. So I had the extra layer of guilt on top of that. I knew that this was absolutely no role model that I ever had imagined being for my children. And so I had heard about, at this stage, I was here volunteering, and I was in that state of mind here, and I'd heard about the journey. So I thought, as one last attempt, before just accepting that I will skip my generation, I will skip my life and just live for my daughters and bring them up somehow so that they can have the chance to live different to me, I will surrender, but I'll do one more thing. I'll try and come on the journey here and see if this could turn things around for me. Before just tired of trying. I was tired of trying by this stage. I didn't have any more energy to try anything, and nothing was working. So I came on the journey, and on the journey I questioned love a lot, and self-worth, and even how to like myself. I understood really clearly self-loathing and self-harming and self-sabotage. I knew that one really, really well. But I didn't understand love. And I felt that I could love others. I did witness love in others, and I could feel that love for my daughters. But I just couldn't feel it for myself. I just felt disconnected from my body and from what that meant. And one evening on the journey, we were snuggled up in Centrefire, listening to Joey telling stories. And for those who don't know Joey, he's a huge part of Embercombe, and he has a huge heart. He's a very big man with a huge, huge heart and a huge soul, a big beard, and he's tattooed all over his body from his, prison tattoos. And that night when we were snuggled up by the fire, I'd assumed that we were going to hear stories of his crime and his past, of his chaos of his life, maybe his prison days, story of redemption. And what I hadn't expected at all was to hear the most romantic love story I've ever heard from this man, Joey, this wonderful man. And that night, I went to bed dreaming of the magic of love and life and possibility and hope. And so the next day I knew I had to find Joey. I thought maybe Joey, he'll have the answer. He knows about love. He's experienced that. I needed to find Joey. I needed to ask Joey, how do I find this love? I just don't understand it. I don't know what it means. And I told him about the rotting, stinky, shitty, toxic bits of my compost, and about how I wanted to stop the suffering. I was just sick of it. And how I actually, at the time, throughout the journey, what I had done is I had lost the will to self-sabotage. I had a huge will to self-sabotage. So that was starting to wane. I was actually feeling that was going, but I didn't know how to love. And how I told Joey how I wanted to get rid of all of those parts of me, and if only I could do that, if I could just shed those bits of me, then I could find peace within myself. And Joey told me very, very straight up, as Joey does, that self-love, that loving myself, is about accepting all of the parts of me. The dark, the shitty, the cloddy, stinking, rotting pits, all the confusion, the shame, the guilt, the pain, the suffering, every bit of it, all of the chapters of my life that has given me all of that too, accepting those, that all of that doesn't get in the way, but that it is the way. To embrace and welcome with kindness and accept every single bit of me and of life, of my life, as it has all made me who I am today. and has all given me some sort of gifts and magic if I can just look and find it. And that it all belongs. He told me to find peace within myself and then everything else would fall into place, instead of trying to find peace within everything else so that I could have it within myself. So find peace within me, accept me. And he told me that I belong in this moment exactly how I am. So I took these wise words away with me and I went and sat quietly out in nature. And the more I sat there with myself, trying to absolutely accept, trying to bring it all in and just go, okay, right, look at me. Who am I? Where have I come from? What have I gone through? I just sat there and I was like, come on, bring it on. Here I am. The more air and space started to seep into my compost. I met myself exactly where I was, not with my ideals of who I thought I was and who I wanted to be, but actually this is who I am, this is where I am at. And the more my compost stopped churning around and it started to settle, I stopped resisting who I was. And I started to feel like I was coming home to myself. And I started to see the truth about who I was and feel liberated in that. So my compost started to feel more alive and nourished and ready to sow. And I realised it was the perfectly imperfect seedbed. And later on the journey, I planted the seed of self-love deep within the whole of my being. And I made a pledge to grow that seed with tenderness, respect, and patience. And my seed of self-love has since sprouted a shoot and grown a root. I would say that it is now representative of that 2-year-old little oak sapling. And I've been working really hard on caring for my seed and feeding it with a compost that I know will help it to grow. And some of the things that I've been working on quite hard over the few years is having more compassion for myself and for others. And forgiving myself, being gentle on myself. When I screw up over and over again, I try and have a little bit more compassion and understanding and just be gentle on myself. And doing the things that give me joy and happiness in my life really helps. Being ready to disappoint others, to stay true to myself. I practice mindfulness from time to time and try and watch my thoughts that come in and the emotions and how I'm doing and choose. I try to choose, not always possible, but I try and choose which ones I give focus and attention to and which ones I might try and leave to wilt. I trust my timings and my flow more and stop trying to control everything and trying to have this structure and this control over the whole of my life. I try and let go a lot more. I've learned how to say no and to put up a shield to people and circumstances and situations that aren't going to respect me or what I want. And I set myself boundaries and limits within that, and I try not to collude with other people. I try and accept what is rather than looking at ideals and seeing everything as gifts and opportunities for learning and growth, rather than being a victim to difficult circumstances. And a big one is trying to have gratitude for even the smallest, simplest things in my life now. I really try and focus a lot more on those, what I can be grateful for every day. So I'm at the very start of my journey of growing my seedling, and I dream of it one day becoming a really big oak tree, deeply and firmly rooted in my own unique, authentic mix of compost.